especially for women too. We talked a little bit previously in another discussion about the glass ceiling and women breaking into clubs like lawyers. I mean, it's a hard profession for women to break into compared to men, at least given the way the system has been built. And so I know that there can be for some women some guilt of sorts that you get all the way to the top, but like, what if you don't want it anymore, if it's not the right thing? And maybe you could speak a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think, being a woman in certain professional environments and most industries is very difficult. Like a lot of them, especially like ones that are very male dominated. And I think in a lot of cases, especially like my generation, we're kind of just taught to like work hard and get a seat at the table. And I totally just really kind of bought into that, and it was hard sometimes because you'd end up at these tables, like both in law and in technology, both are very like male dominated, where I would be like at these literal tables just ask myself like, what am I doing here? And sure, on some abstract level this is pretty great, like my father is the first person in his whole family lineage to go to college, right? I am the first person in my whole family to go to law school. um it's exciting on a certain level, but like on the day-to-day level of sitting there in those chairs or in my office doing the work, I like didn't actually like it. Or it's almost like the idea of the achievement more than the achievement itself. And I think that's also really compelling, like it just seems like such a great idea on an abstract level to be like, I can walk into this room and tell these like tech bros what to do and they'll listen to me. I was like, but do I really care about the outcome of this, right? And is this really how I want my energy to be spent? And did I go to school like for all these years and to be here doing this thing, right? And it's not that I downgrade or denigrate anyone who really has hit those levels and is sitting at those tables and doing that work, because having done just a little bit of it, I can imagine how hard it is to do that and to kind of like be those, role models for us. But I also think on a personal level, it's also okay to ask yourself, like, what is this about for me? And is this how I want to live my life? And are these other things, the trappings of this success, enough to keep me happy? Um, and I think that a lot of people, they do reach those levels and then they're still not quite feeling totally satisfied. And they look in these other directions for why that is. And the truth of the matter is, it's like they got what they wanted, but they don't really like what they got, right? And there's a little bit of guilt and sadness and fear and all these things in that, because I think, especially for very goal oriented people, it seems like if you get your goal, you should be happy. And it's very destabilizing for that not to be the case, right? Because then you have to like really excavate and unearth like, what does that happiness actually mean for you? Like obviously there's more to life than just being happy as well. So we have just like all these layers and all these complex emotions and pressures that are weighing on us. And I think it's just really hard because it's easy for women to just feel like, well, I need to be here because if I'm not here, there'll be no one like me. And it's just good. I'm also going to show these guys in this room that I can't hack this. I can't do this. Right. But at the same time, it's like, well, maybe it's because so much of the structure is just sort of broken that no one really wants to be here. And is it really helping anyone by me also not having the willingness to say this isn't working, right? Like what will ultimately change the spaces that we're in, rather than just trying to like get into spaces that we don't like to be in. Like that's I get that very much so, but at the same time, for me as a person, it's like it didn't give me enough reason to stay. It made me feel good about getting there, but it just could not keep me there for that long.
I completely relate with everything you said, and makes me think of Rishma Sajani. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. She was the founder of Girls Who Code, and she wrote a book back in 2019 called Brave Not Perfect. And it was kind of the feminist mythology, have it all mythology in corporate America. And it was about charging the boardroom and breaking through the glass ceiling and having that seat at the table and then having everything at home too. And then the pandemic hit in 2020 and she had a newborn and she realized, holy crap, I don't even believe what I just wrote in this book that just came out a year ago. And so she just came out with another book last month called Pay Up, The Future of Women at Work and Why It's Different from What You Think, because she talks about just that it's not about individuals, climbing their way up and clawing their way up and being a martyr for the sake of everyone else. It's about completely deconstructing the systems that are at play that are encumbering women in the workplace. And she actually did a really interesting interview in the Washington Post where she completely walked back on what she said. And she's like, if I gave advice to that version of me who wrote that book, Brave Not Perfect, I would tell her I was wrong with what I said. And so you make a great point where we're now reaching in sort of like the next iteration of women's rights and evolution in the workplace and stuff like that. It's becoming like, let's look systemically rather than just saying we need to work harder to make it to the top kind of a thing. So I'm totally with you because ultimately how you live your days is how you live your life. And if you're not happy with that, then what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and so you mentioned too that after you left law, you had folks even coming to you that you had worked with saying, I don't know if this is right for me either necessarily. And so I think it's really interesting too that when one person kind of follows their truth, it opens up that possibility for others and you kind of get a new seed planted. So maybe if you wouldn't mind speaking a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because when you go to something like law school, and I'm sure other professional schools have this as well, there's actually like they're pretty honest about, how difficult the practice of law is, and like there are a lot of pitfalls with it. And we actually have like a whole class that kind of gives us, a sense of like the things that we need to watch out for. Lawyers have very high rates of alcoholism and other substance abuse. The statistics show that the vast majority of people don't actually practice within 5 or 10 years of graduating from law school. And a lot of it is the way that the practice is conducted. So it's not like I was rare or anything, it's something that was like inevitable in lots of ways. But I think no matter what, even actually, especially in the face of those types of statistics and as kind of like competitive and high achieving people, you're like, oh no, but that's not going to be me. Right. But the statistics do indicate that it happens for a reason, and it's a predominant reason. So because so many of my friends are lawyers, I've talked to lots of them. Many of them did not like the practice, and they did want to make a change. And it was always interesting to me because my friends who practice law are some of the smartest people I know, and they've accomplished amazing things. And when we talk about, if they were to make a transition, they always seem like, oh, well, I just can't do anything else. And that's always just shocked me so much because I'm like, you're a very smart person. You've proven yourself in all these other ways. To say that you couldn't take this capability and put it in another direction just does not make sense to me, right? Like just logically speaking, most of us were not like predestined to become these people. Of course you could channel this energy and this like intelligence into many other industries and be very successful, but for some reason it's like you kind of have like these blinders and you just don't think it's possible. But it's interesting because what also happened was, because I was earlier among my cohort to kind of proactively leave the practice, people would talk to me about it because I was sort of safe, right? I'd already done the thing, I'd done the taboo thing, and it just was much more common than I think any of us wanted to admit, because we worked so hard to get there. But it also made it interesting because I think it also made my choice feel less difficult in that way, because I was like, oh no, people don't look down on me. They're actually kind of like a little envious that I like don't have to deal with some of the same stuff that they now have to deal with. And but we've also always had that commonality where for my friends who are still attorneys, which many of them are, we can still talk about it, right? Because I went through it and I'm like this person that went through it, but I also like am not in the same pressure cooker that they're in. So it's like this really nice combination, like someone that they can be really, really honest about with like some of the details of what sucks and what's difficult, and really dig into the weeds with it that can understand them. But at the same time, I think it does help to have someone that you trust and to have gone through this thing, because then it's no longer inconceivable, right? And I have been not practicing law far longer than I had. So at this point, a lot of people are like, "Oh yeah, you've had like a whole other career since then and you're fine and it's fine. Like you didn't just like kind of like, disappear into like a cloud of shame or something like that." And even now, like I have friends who are thinking about making transitions, and I think that there's something said to be like one of their people that made that change, that they can look to as like, okay, one of numerous reasons why this should be okay. This will be okay. Yeah.
Exactly. It's so true. You've got to look for those examples. I was talking with a woman who she was a civil engineer and she decided to leave being a civil engineer to start her own affirmation card company, which is completely outside of the realm of anything that somebody who signed up to be an engineer would have thought of. But the moment that she had the light bulb go off saying, maybe I could do this myself, is when another engineer also left and she actually went sailing uh, on a sailboat. She's still on a sailboat now for 18 months. She quit and she's fine and she's loving her life. And it's like, maybe that could be me too. That's when we can actually start to see it or see outside our own limitations, I guess. So, yeah. Now, if you were to go back in time and take a look at when you first made that kind of big leap, with all the hindsight you've accumulated, what would you say would be your greatest piece of advice for yourself, for Jen of that time?
I would just say, I would tell Jen of that time that like, you're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. That of course you're going to still worry about it and you're going to like go over how you're going to tell people over and over and over and over again in your mind. Like that's just the kind of person you are, and you're going to worry and you're going to feel like the shame and the guilt and like a failure. But that in the end, you will gain so much from this experience, that we have to go through these big changes in order to really grow. And I would tell her that if you do this, you will not regret it a single day of your life. Like, I think that there are people that always are filled with like what could happen if I stayed the course. And I will tell you that I never think about that. Like at this point, it's been over a decade and I just have zero thoughts about who I could have been if I had done that. And like what we're saying about like flexing the muscle, I would also tell her like, you're going to get really good at this, and it's going to be something that is going to be just one of the best traits about you, not just for your professional life, but for like the rest of your life, that you are going to be able to handle and manage change in a way that is going to serve you well in a sort of chaotic world.
Ooh, I love that. What a valuable skill that is for sure. So then for other women out there, what would be the advice that you give to women now, either in the Great Resignation who've recently left their jobs, for maybe those women who are still considering making a move? Actually, a Deloitte study just came out this past week that said that more than 50% of women plan to quit their jobs within 2 years, and only 10% actually plan to be with their current company for more than 5 years, which those are unprecedented, alarming statistics. So there are a lot of women out there who are having those same sort of like internal rumblings that you and I both had as we were trying to figure out what was going to come next for us. What would be kind of like your biggest piece of advice for them?
I have so many, but I think I would say really reach out to other people, reach out to your friends. Most of my good friends tend to be women. So, it'd be easy for me to say, like, reach out to other women and just like share your story and listen to theirs. But it doesn't have to be women. I would just say, don't try to do this alone and don't think you have to figure it out alone. That the more you talk to other people, not only does it give you more strength and fortitude to do it, but you also give other people in your world a chance to share with you. And I think that's just like really powerful, like and also you just never know, like when you reach out to people around you, you meet people that you might end up working with or working for someday, or like realizing that you guys have actually a lot in common about what you want to do and you both are want to change jobs and maybe you'll work together someday. That's actually how one of my business partners and I found each other. So I would just say, like, with this many people engaging in this big change and what could potentially be like a fundamental shift in how women, conduct themselves in the workforce and what work looks like for us as a society, I think we should continue to do what we're good at, which is reach out to each other, share with each other, and support each other in this process. I feel like I kind of did it very much alone because I did sort of, again, have some shame and like I was one of the first people in my group to do it. But I really think there's no reason for it to be that way now, not with like the numbers that you're putting out there. And I think it'd be way more fun, a lot less scary, and actually probably part of a very healing and beneficial process if we kind of like were willing to include other people in what sometimes we make like a very personal and individual process. But you know it is important that we make choices for ourselves, but it doesn't mean we like completely have to get all of our shit figured out before we bring other people in, right?
Exactly. You don't have to isolate. You don't have to hide. You don't have to hunker away to make these big decisions. You do need to stay connected with your inner compass and what it's telling you in the direction that you're headed. But you can absolutely reach out and garner support because, to your point, I love what you said earlier. The people who care about you, they care about how you're doing, not what you're doing. They just want to see you happy and thriving and living a great life. And that's where we can really lean on others. I think I've been personally pretty guilty of staying stuck and struggling without really articulating or reaching out to people until I'm hitting a true breaking point where, for me, it manifested physically in throwing up blood and shingles. And if I'd really been honest, not only with myself, but even talking with people before that, it potentially could have been a little bit of a different outcome. But no, I think that's a wonderful piece of advice. So as far as your story and kind of where you're headed next and what people take away from this conversation, what would you say is kind of like the biggest takeaway from your career thus far and where you're headed?
I think it is important to just like keep following your curiosity. That's what I'm going to do. Um, and for me, what I realized is I really want to work with people and organizations that are trying to have some type of positive social impact. And even if that means I have to be more particular or I have to adjust my rate so that they can afford my services, I'm willing to do that because at this point, I feel like I've worked really hard to develop a certain skill set and toolkit that I find is really effective, and I just want to make sure that I'm using it in kind of like the most interesting and important way that I can. So yeah, I really want to like stay interested, but I think it's not just about novelty for me. It's also about like, are the things I'm working for like purpose driven? And a lot of that is very much focused on who I'm working with and what their values are. Because I'm a consultant and I'm a coach, so it's really about the people. So yeah, that's for me. I think after all these years of kind of like going in all these different industries, it's like I want to kind of come back to kind of like personally what matters to me.
Definitely. I think that is a perfect note to end on. So thank you so much, Jen. This has been a fantastic conversation. We can't wait to hear everything that you do with your consultancy moving forward. So certainly more to come from Jen.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your taking the time to chat with me.